It's a great honor for me to be here at the Empire Club of Canada today, which is arguably the most famous and historically relevant speakers podium to have ever existed in Canada. It has offered its podium to such international luminaries as Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Audrey Hepburn, the Dalai Lama, Indira Gandhi, and closer to home, from Pierre Trudeau to Justin Trudeau. Literally generations of our great nation's leaders, alongside with those of the world's top international diplomats, heads of state, and business and thought leaders.
It is a real honor and a distinct privilege to be invited to speak to the Empire Club of Canada, which has been welcoming international diplomats, leaders in business and in science and in politics. When they stand at that podium, they speak not only to the entire country, but they can speak to the entire world.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 117th season of the Empire Club of Canada. My name is Antoinette Tamilo. I'm the president of the Empire Club of Canada and your host for today's virtual event, The Future is Electric. I'd like to begin this afternoon with an acknowledgement that the land we are broadcasting from is the traditional territory of the many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. For those of you tuning in from regions across the country today, we encourage you to learn more about the traditional territory on which you work or live. I now want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who generously support the Empire Club and make these events possible. Thank you to our lead sponsor, Hydro One, and our supporting sponsors, Aecon, Fluor, Kinetrix, USNC, NewScale, Terrestrial Energy, and the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries. I also want to thank our season sponsors, Waste Connections of Canada and the Canadian Bankers Association. And last but not least, I also want to thank our event partner, VBC and livemeeting.ca for webcasting today's event. Now for a few logistical items. First, if you're finding your internet feed is slow, please click the Switch Streams button on the right-hand side of the screen. And don't hesitate to press the Request for Help button if you are experiencing technical difficulties. Our team will be happy to assist you. I also want to remind everyone participating today that this is an interactive event. Although a recording of this event will be made available, those attending live are encouraged to engage with our speakers by taking advantage of the question box to the right of your screen. We have allotted some time for Q&A towards the end of the discussion. We also invite you to share your thoughts on social media using our hashtag Empire Club of Canada and hashtag NetZero2050, which you can find in the corner of your viewer throughout the event. It is now my pleasure to call this virtual meeting to order. We are excited to bring to you today this event on a topic that is top of mind with Canadians. Climate change and the environment is an issue that has great implications for our country, our planet, and future generations. Learning more about how we can help and how our large institutions are responding is critically important now more than ever. Today, we will hear from the Ontario Power Generation, who have delivered one of the world's single largest climate change actions by closing its coal stations. OPG is boldly investing in new technologies that will help drive the clean economy. You'll hear about OPG's climate change plan and why Ontario's largest clean power generator is emphasizing electrification of everything and an all hands on deck approach to generating technology. I will now very briefly introduce our panelists and then hand over to them to make the most of our time today and get the discussion started. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome back Ken Hartwick and Anita Sharma to the Empire Club of Canada once again. Ken Hartwick serves as President and CEO of Ontario Power Generation, a clean energy leader and one of North America's most diverse power generators. Ken has spent more than 34 years in the finance and energy sectors. In his previous role as Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President of Finance, he led the launch of Canada's first utility green bond, as well as OPG's expansion to the United States through the acquisition of Eagle Creek Renewable Energy LLC. He also championed the development of OPG's first ever climate change plan. Interviewing Ken today is Anita Sharma, national news anchor with CTV News Channel, host of CTV's prime time program, seen nationally from coast to coast. Anita started her journalism career in 2001 as a national network news anchor for CBC television and has interviewed newsmakers from around the world, including heads of states, finance ministers, and global business leaders. And there's a rumor out that she'll be interviewing Mr. Hartwick at 7:15 tonight on her show. If you'd like to learn more about Ken or Anita, you can find their full bios by scrolling down below the video window on your screen. Now I'd like to hand it over to Anita to get the discussion started. Over to you, Anita.
Antoinette, thank you so much for that. It's an absolute pleasure to be back with you again, to be back with the Empire Club, and of course, to have this sit-down fireside chat, albeit virtually, with Mr. Hartwick. Ken, it's great to be with you. As Antoinette suggested, boy, is this such a huge topic right now. It's just making global headlines. We do know that the Canadian government is on a mission. The feds are on a mission to get our nation to a net zero emission situation by 2050. And this is where, Ken, you come in, right, with the OPG. I understand, as Antoinette alluded to, you've been making quite significant progress, I guess, in this area to sort of get on side and get green fast.
Yeah, Anita, first of all, it's great to be here and great to have everybody on the call listening today or watching today. But your point's right. I think, Canada's on board, but much more broadly, I think around the world now, we have seen countries, G7 that's going on currently, but countries rally around the need to start to do concrete actions to deal with climate change, which is real and impactful. And I think all of us in the industry and more broadly need to start to think about what our piece of that is, what role we can play. Some of us will be able to play bigger roles. Some will play smaller roles, and that's great. But we need everybody playing their role so that there's a clear, we can take sort of a goal and a target that governments tend to set and turn it into actionable items so we actually achieve the goal and target. So I think we're in the very, very early stages of starting down this journey, but it's an exciting one. And I think it's something that we'll be talking about for years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with a target of 2050, that's 30 years out, right? But I understand with OPG, let's go macro, and then we'll really deep dive into this. What are you setting as targets for OPG? Because I understand you're actually going to meet these targets 10 years ahead of the Fed's, I don't want to say demand, but request, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so we set our net zero target for 2040, which advances a little bit. And I think there's two important things or reasons we did that for. Okay. The first is to drive a little bit of leadership. That we think, if you're going to actually get to a target by 50, it's like anything we do, don't leave everything to the last few years. Some companies, some entities have to do more sooner because like anything, the last 10% is really, really hard to do. So we just thought, let's do some of the bigger pieces early And that way, you know, you have momentum around what we're doing, and then others will follow and do their part towards this. And then the second reason was really, or the second maybe more question I get asked a lot is, do you know exactly what you're going to do to achieve the target by 40? The answer is no. We have a pretty good idea on a lot of it. Other parts, we trust the innovation, ingenuity of OPG people, of a lot of our partners, many of which are on this call, you know, on the meeting today, to ultimately innovate as we go. So we just felt, go early, try to get more done quicker. And that last 10%, if everybody has to struggle a bit, then you have a bit of time to struggle with the hardest parts at the end.
It's such a fluid situation, right? Can you talk about targets that are set out like some 3 decades? And I'm sure a lot of folks appreciate that you're trying to get ahead of that by at least a decade. Electrification is certainly one big component that everyone is looking at. When they see green, they see electricity. We're seeing companies like, I don't even want to name the companies, but basically a lot of companies trying to go green. We're seeing it in the electric vehicle sector. I know you had made a deal just very recently with the Toronto Transit Commission in terms of helping them electrify, maybe on the I believe on the charging side. How critical is it to get that component up and running? You know, if we just had this conversation a few years ago, folks would have been maybe rolling their eyes. Folks that aren't in the business, aren't doing what you do on a daily basis. But today, Ken, it seems to be front in mind for a lot of folks as they look at going green and they look squarely at electricity.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The industry is filled with engineers and accountants, lots of other people as well. And, you know, this is a little bit of a math equation that if you are going to achieve Canada's goals by 50 or OPG's by 2040, the only way to do it is to electrify significant parts of the economy. So, you know, you referenced the TTC, which is a partnership with the Toronto Transit Commission, us, and Toronto Hydro to electrify their bus system, because you can't run gas or diesel buses and still hit targets. You know, every car will be electric. Like, and my view is they'll be electric much sooner than we think, because eventually consumers will get to the point of saying, I don't want to buy a gas car if I know it won't even be applicable, you know, 3 years from now. So this happens quicker, and we need it to happen quicker. And I give the TTC a lot of credit. They are very, very innovative in their thought process. And again, they were a company that decided to lead on this, to get out in front. And a lot of times when you lead on a topic, you tend to make the first of a kind mistakes and those types of things. But it requires entities like TTC and others to step forward and lead if we're really going to get to where we want to go. There's no time to wait and follow, in my view.
And Ken, it really is a multi-pronged effort, right? You need the companies basically coming in. You know, you gave us a brief idea of what you're up to, and of course, we'll explore that even further in the minutes and ahead. But what about on the policy side? So you have the feds essentially coming out and saying, look, we want to achieve this by 2050. What does it look like from an infrastructure point of view, where, to your point, you know, Joe and Jill sitting at home watching this right now saying, you know, yeah, I would like to buy an electric vehicle. I would like to move towards electrification in other areas too of my life. But what does it look like on the infrastructure side? They need that support. Folks need that support from companies like you and from the feds. Is that not right?
Yes. So I'd say at the federal, provincial level, I think what you want to see is policies set out to get there. And I think those are set out largely across Canada. And now it comes into execution. And to put this into a sense of magnitude, when we look at Ontario, and I think this is true of Canada and true of probably the US and other developed countries, you need a power system that's 2 to 3 times as big as what it is now. So 2 to 3 times as much generation, transmission, you know, wow, wires, all the things to move it around. And because if you think every car is electric, every bus is electric, buildings are more electric, some of your heating is more electric. This is a massive undertaking. So I think it's good. Governments have set out these broad policy goals. That's definitely a requirement. And now what I think, you know, and it's really a lot of the people that are listening today, it's the business community at large needs to take these and say, great, here is how they can help proceed down these paths. And again, from an OPG perspective, you know, when we talk about the power system need to be a lot bigger, we think in terms of how do we build out the generation capability so you can drive an electric car, you know, and everywhere you want to drive it across the province or across the country. And we think that's part of what our role is to ensure that this gets facilitated in a cost-effective way for the citizens of Ontario and Canada.
Canada is such a global powerhouse, right? When it comes to energy, we really do fire off on so many cylinders, no pun intended. We know what some companies in the oil space and the oil and gas space are dealing with right now, trying to comply, trying to get on side, dealing with some political issues. On the nuclear side, I find this very fascinating. Nuclear capabilities, it seems like we really need that. And yet when there's discussion about possibly creating a new generator, creating a new site, there's really that NIMBY in effect, right? Not in my backyard. Where is the OPG with respect to this particular area? How are you powering forward, so to speak?
Right. So I think the starting point is if climate, carbon, pollutants, if they are now defined better as the enemy, that's what we have to reduce. Then it's now just a question of how do we electrify as much as we need to electrify in order to reduce it. And I think what people are starting to realize, and this is a lot of people who would have questioned the NIMBY or been part of the NIMBY movement before, is you can't get there without nuclear. Now, it requires every technology. We need more wind, we need more solar, we need more hydroelectric, we need more nuclear, we need more batteries, we need more of a lot of things to double the size of the Ontario system. And that level of maturity in the conversation is just now beginning to happen. And we see it happening on the world stage as well, where countries before that were maybe a bit not prone to be on the nuclear side are now saying, no, it's part of the answer. So if we want to get our climate targets, we're going to have to rethink how we do nuclear. And this is something where I think Ontario has an amazing story. We have a great nuclear operators. Us and Bruce Power are the two companies that operate the nuclear plants in the province. We have an amazing supply chain, amazing set of vendors. I think we're actually probably one of the leaders in the world in the ability to do this. So I'm excited by it. And to me, it's now an education process to deal with the NIMBY part of what you raised, which is very fair for people to have questions. Yep. But we think those are there's a more common enemy in the foreground, and that's climate change.
So powering ahead with nuclear, and thank you for that, Ken. Powering ahead on the nuclear front, give us an idea of where small modular reactors or SMRs fit in this equation. Is this the new technology? Is this going to help assuage any fears with respect to nuclear? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So first of all, it is the new technology. And we're looking at two different types of SMRs. One are micro. So these might be very small ones that you might locate at a mine site, at a remote community that probably operates on diesel right now. And that's where USNC, we're partnered with them on that side. And then we're looking at the bigger grid scale, the ones you use to produce electricity, to electrify all the things we want to electrify, of which we are working towards siting one out at our Darlington site out in Clarington, so east of Toronto. And that will probably be the first SMR built in North America. The good thing is that we start to see a number of US companies, a number of US states begin to move down the same path. We have 4 provinces in Canada, so Alberta, Saskatchewan, us, and New Brunswick, all saying we want to move down this technology path. And we said we would go first to try to build the first one. And again, there's lots, it's always nice to go second, I will say, but we just think it's the right thing.
I always wanted to be number 2.
Yeah, in this case, but we think we have, like I say, we have great partners when we deal with Bruce Power and New Brunswick Power, and then our supply chain folks that deal with us. So we're pretty confident that we're going to site the first one and have it operational by 2028, which is what the current goal is.
Okay. I have, as part of my discussions on CTV News Channel, when I cover off the business angles, I'm really obsessed right now with what the labor force is going to look at. We look at wage inflation. We look at the recent data where a lot of folks, whether it's the pandemic, who knows what it is, rich in assets, a lot of folks are choosing to stay out of the workforce. For OPG, for folks in your industry that are really looking for that work or a specific skill set. How are you doing on that front? When you look out 10, 20, 30 years, maybe even 2, 3 years. What does your labor force look like? Or do you have any concerns in this area that perhaps the training is not there to get you to that next level, Ken?
Yeah, the concerns exist. I think your point's a really good one because it's keeping the skill set current is also a big part of this. And if Canada goes on a big infrastructure build, which the federal government announced as part of their budget, that draws in the need for resources, the need for different skills at the trades level as well as at the professional level. And so I think it's incumbent on a lot of us, and we do a lot of work with a couple of the universities, the colleges, and the skilled trade schools to promote this. And it's very interesting. Some of the promotion of it needs to happen back in early high school, right? To get people interested in, everyone thinks of a welder. What comes to mind? Dark, dingy gear on and a mask on, and it's a dirty work. Now, welding is actually very, very interesting now. It's robotic, it's high skill. The people that we have out at our stations that do it, but it's people don't see it. So we have spent a lot of time going back into high schools and saying this is a great career to try to build that pipeline so that by the time people decide, do I go to college, do I go to university, or do I go and get whatever my appropriate ticket might be in order to go into the trades, to try to really populate that. And then the second part, I'd say on the skilled side, it's, and this is very specific to nuclears, we're doing a lot of work back in the engineering schools to say, look, nuclear is now the thing. So if you're going through engineering school, maybe you should start to think about it. And we're getting a great response from the universities that are starting to say, yes, they do think it's part of it. And so their curriculum is starting to alter towards that. I will say just the final point on what you raised is I do find with COVID, what we've been through, that has been particularly impactful on the women in our workplace. And
how so?
Childcare, and whether it's the right or wrong, but the primary responsibility in many cases with schools, with daycares, and again, it's something as a company we've tried to be very thoughtful and empathetic on to ensure that we can accommodate the reality until we get back to normal in September, maybe, I hope.
Yeah, that's a fascinating angle too. If we just want to explore that for a little bit, we're seeing more and more companies can just come out now and letting their employees, right? And you're at the top of OPG, you'd be spearheading this as well. Just letting their companies know what September, October, what the fall looks like. Hopefully, when we're post-pandemic, I know we're in the final stretch, but we're certainly not out of it as yet with all these discussions of variants. But what does that look like for you? Whether it's women, whether it's men, whether it's, you got a lot of these, getting back to the labor force issue, right? You have a lot of folks now saying, I don't want to go back to work 5 days a week. I don't physically want to be in a space 5 days a week. And I say this knowing full well you built a beautiful company, beautiful headquarters in downtown Toronto. What does that look like for you, Ken? I'm really curious because you get all that intel.
It is. Now, to start with, so we have about 9,500 employees. 7,000 have come into work every day, right? They work in a plant. We're all essential, deemed essential service, and they go in and run our plants every day. So it's really the 2,500 that we're dealing with. And what we've announced is that we intend to phase people back into work in September. And again, all subject to any changes in,
for sure,
variants or other events that could happen. But to bring people back in, because we'll probably do it with some flexibility. Like I said, I think we have to be very empathetic in our thought process, while schools restart, daycares restart, all the things that allow us to function in our life and in our work careers, to allow that to happen. But I do want people back, because the one thing I think they really, really miss, and this is especially our younger people in their career, it's the interaction, it's the mentoring, it's the 5 minutes in the hallway to talk about an issue.
For sure.
And too long, it impacts people's development. So I'm keen to get people back because, I may not be working in 2050 when we hit our climate, or, when Canada hits its climate targets. So I need someone younger in the company that can carry the torch.
I only have one final question for you, and then you let me know if there's something you want to bring up that I haven't gotten to. But it just goes back to the whole idea of hydro-produced energy. We talked about getting governments involved, or you already, as you outlined, the governments already have made their policy, the feds have already made their policy clear. It's really up to you and your colleagues now to execute and to hit those targets. But where are you with working with neighboring provinces like Manitoba, like Quebec? And I asked that question inside of a bigger potential problem, which is maybe not for your sector, but with oil and gas, let's say, we've seen all the issues with pipelines, particularly with what's happening south of the border, regulations, again, NIMBY at play with various states coming forward, blocking certain pipelines from going forward. How important is it to work with your provincial partners in terms of powering ahead here?
It's important. It's ongoing. We interact with virtually every province and a number of the neighboring states, which we're connected to as well. So, all the ones you think, New York, Ohio, all down through the East Coast. So all of these are part of it. But this is where the conversation, I think, needs to get far more mature than it is at times. Is that, we have the expression which is all hands on deck. It's going to require everyone to solve this problem, every technology, every province working maybe more closely together. And I'd say the one thing on you've mentioned oil and gas, which I think is important. We have to recognize we have the resource here in Canada. We have a lot of the resource here in Canada. And what if we step back and started to think around, we're not going to phase it out tomorrow. We need a plan to decarbonize it, to make it cleaner. And why are we importing anything from any country who doesn't have the same environmental responsibility we do? That's a question I think that should be asked and should be answered. Because, and I say this on some of the other technologies is that, and I love solar, we have a solar facility, but the environmental impact to produce a solar panel is extreme. Right? You mine some minerals, you dump waste products, dump them down a river, you manufacture in China, dump some more stuff down a river, and we get a solar panel in a box. And we say, well, that's amazing, it's all green. It isn't. So this is why the maturity of this conversation, and it applies to our oil and gas sector, we need to be helping them decarbonize what they do so we can utilize it as a transition resource until we have a fully green economy. And that's a different level of maturity than most people want to talk about.
And real quick, before we wrap this up, you talked about the import side. How significant is the export side in terms of, we have to deal with the fact that we do have this energy source right now. And to your point, it's not going to be a full stop, stop this tomorrow right now. It has to be a gradual process, especially for an industry that has been powering, for historically a long time, the Canadian economy. What does exporting look like if you see issues potentially south of the border? What does it look like in terms of working with even global partners on that stage?
Yeah, it's going to become harder and harder. It's that's just a reality. You see it with the pipeline issues now. You see it with other things, and this is why I think if we step back a little bit and said, how do we support our oil and gas industry so they're operating in the most environmentally friendly way possible? And then don't import from anyone who doesn't. I think that's actually a better answer if we're serious about climate change. If we're just serious about, there's a term called greenwashing where I just pretend I am. If that's what we want to do, we don't need to do that then.
No, look, 2040, right? OPG's target, 10 years ahead of the Fed's request. So it looks like you all are powering ahead on that front. I want to thank you, Ken. This has been an absolutely exhilarating conversation. So much information. I hope it's been value add for the folks tuning in with the Empire Club. Ken, any final thoughts?
No, I just really maybe for the folks listening is, I think this is if we all think about what our role is on climate change, just encourage everyone to step back and say, what is the maximum role any of us, our organizations, and or us as individuals can play, and really challenge ourselves to do more quicker. And doing more quicker, sometimes you fail once in a while when you try that, but it's better, and we'll have enough successes along the way. And I think that's what I'm very proud of the team at OPG is that as collectively as a group of 9,500 people, we've decided to try to do more and more quickly. And I think we'll do a decent job of it along the way.
Okay, fluid situation, everyone's powering ahead on full cylinders, all of those metaphors. Yes. Ken, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. You're going to stick around though, right? We have a question and answer segment coming up. I know a lot of folks The messages are coming through, have questions for you. So in the meantime, Ken, thank you. Let's send it back to Antoinette. Antoinette, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Hey, Anita, I think you're better positioned to ask the questions. I mean, this is your shtick.
All right, let's do it. Let's do
All
it.
right, I'm handing it right back to you.
Okay. All right, Ken. That was short and sweet. Here we are. Let's go. So we have a question from Mike. He asks, can OPG provide climate leadership and initiatives beyond Ontario?
The real short answer is yes, and that is our intention. And as we mentioned at the introduction, we own a series of about 70 hydroelectric plants through mostly Northeast US. We are working with the other provinces. So Saskatchewan is also looking at new nuclear, and we have an MOU with them to work with them on potential new nuclear, which would replace coal facilities. And I think the leadership also comes from going first on certain things, right? So one of the initiatives that we've started off is to look at building hydrogen plants, which will be part of the new fuel mix going forward. We've indicated we'll move towards building 2. And again, our thought is that if we can start, perhaps other provinces or other companies will say, great, we'll just emulate and start. So leadership, I think, can both be physical leadership across, partnerships we have across the country, but also just by leading itself will cause others to do things that benefit the goals that we all have.
Yeah, very interesting, right? It's tough to forge through on your own. And with this being such a new initiative, it's going to be fascinating, right? And probably integral and important to learn from your peers, work with your peers as you try to move ahead here. Let's get to another question, Ken. This is from, well, we don't know who it's from, but what does Ken see as the single biggest barrier to a complete conversion to electrification? So you talked earlier just about working with the TTC, getting everyone on board as quickly as possible, doing this in a responsible manner. What do you see as possible obstacles here?
I'd say it is indecision, which is usually the obstacle to everything. And it's indecision by governments who, because the move to electrification is a transition, right? And if you look at some of the car companies, right, GM, Ford, Toyota, they've all announced they're going to transition from gas engines to electric, right? And whenever you try to transition, there's a disruption in the process, and there tends to be gaps, and so it can cause companies to be very indecisive. It can cause governments to be very indecisive. Wait till the next election cycle. This riding might be mad, that one will be happy. All these things slow it down. And the one thing I'll give the federal government credit for is they've done a good job of saying, let's move some of our targets forward to see if we can accomplish certain things a bit quicker, so we can hit our 2050 targets. Which I really support, and but now companies have to take that and be pioneers in some cases, but really start to lead versus waiting too much. And that's why I said at OPG we put out our climate plan just before the holidays last year. We moved the date up. We have lots of very interesting things we're doing that will support it. And what we need is every company in Canada saying, we're just going to start. But indecision is the barrier to every good idea.
And Ken, indecision costs money, right? Every day you're waiting, every day you're potentially sitting on your hands, not able to execute a path forward. And to your point earlier, seeking perfection, like we've seen with the pandemic, looking for perfection. If you wait for perfection, most people aren't going to get anywhere. So in this case, indecision really can be a barrier economically as well, right? It could hit the bottom line.
Yeah, and that's why if you look across a lot of the partners that we deal with from the OCNI and really the industry partners, what I give them a lot of credit for as they've embraced the role that we can play in climate is we start to see ideas coming our way and to other people that produce electricity and Hydro One that distributes, transmits it. We start to see these innovative thoughts and ideas come forward that we just wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so that's why we have a lot of smart people in Ontario. We have a lot of smart people in this sector. We need more. And with that comes that innovation, entrepreneurship, and then indecision sort of goes by the wayside if you have that. So I think we have the brains to do it. Now we just have to be brave enough to push forward on it.
This is a side note coming from me, a side question, but what does that electrification look like on the streets of Barrie or Oshawa or Toronto? Are we going to see, I'm thinking vehicles for now, but are we going to see charging stations? Is OPG going to be front and center working with other companies as well to ensure that the infrastructure is there? What does the role look like to you, a Canadian city look like to you insofar as electrification is concerned? Let's just say 5 years out.
Right. So I think if it looks something like if I'm driving a car into work, I'm not worried about where there's a charger because there's chargers along the street at the parking stops. There's chargers at every parking lot. There's charging stations in every building that you park in, every office tower.
And the new gas station?
It's the new gas station. It's exactly right. But when I park my car, I plug it in, but I also give Toronto Hydro the ability to draw power out of the battery if on a really hot summer day. So now the car is also a smart battery producer of electricity. I'll make sure it's charged at the end of the day. So when you go to drive home, you're not down there and your battery has zero. So it's creating this smart technology environment where people embrace it. TTC, it's very similar. So you think about that infrastructure, every bus will be electric. The charging station where the buses go when it's not peak time. So if peak times are, probably 6 a.m. till 10 and then again in the afternoon, we can use those buses as batteries to put power on the grid in the middle part of the day where it's less busy. So I think just people are going to now see that it's, if you drive a gas car, you don't even think about it when you drive out of your house. I'm going to stop at a gas station. I'm going to park my car. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to take all that anxiety people have around what do I do? And it'll just be, it'll be stuck. And a lot of it'll be technology enabled. That's why I think it's getting cool again. It's not just big power plants. It's also how do we use cars, buses, other vehicles to do this.
It's been a political hot rod, right? When you talk about electrification, when you talk about climate change. And I think, some folks want to make clear that it doesn't really matter what political party you're from. A cleaner environment should be, I hate to use the word should, but should be the goal of every citizen. The question is, how do you get there? Which is why you and I are sitting here today having this deep dive discussion about how to get there smartly with minimal economic impact, right? Getting people on board, moving forward. You talk about working with Toronto Hydro insofar as, these potential or these upcoming charging stations are concerned. I also want to know your thoughts on natural gas, because I understand you use that to supplement nuclear power in peak periods, like you talked about with Toronto Hydro. So where do you see the future of natural gas?
Yeah, so it's one of the criticisms we get in our climate plan is how can you move towards carbon neutral if you're running a fleet of natural gas plants, right, which produce carbon. And again, this goes back to the maturity of the discussion. You do need some forms of electricity because batteries don't work all the time. Solar panels don't work at night. Windmills don't work certain parts of the day. So you need generation that can come up or down to keep the whole system going. The real part of the conversation around natural gas, and this is your reference to the oil industry as well, but natural gas plants for us is how do we decarbonize the impact of a natural gas plant? So how do we blend hydrogen in, which we're working on a partnership that would reduce the amount of carbon out of a gas plant. So all of a sudden the gas plant is cleaner. How do you do things like carbon capture? So you capture all the carbon and store it that comes out of a natural gas plant. So what do you have? Then you have a really clean natural gas plant. And this is where people, I just bet on our innovation much more than what I think some people do. We will figure this out. And not just me, but collectively the industry. And by the time we get to 2040, what we'll have is clean natural gas plants that produce very little carbon, but serve their purpose. And I think it'll be an important part of what we do. So that's why I say all these things, innovation's a funny thing. It solves problems we don't even know about. It also solves problems we do. And it will solve this problem.
Okay, I'm also really curious, and it looks like Jill is as well. I was watching business news this morning. I'm sure you do this every morning, I do. And I saw Mary Barra of GM, and she was asked a question by a journalist about batteries. You know, should they be deep diving into the whole battery situation, seeing that as a lucrative opportunity for GM? To that point, we have a question from Jill, and she asks you, Ken, more electrical power will require more batteries. Now, batteries don't last forever and can be a real disposal issue. How do you see that particular potential issue being tackled? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so batteries there's a couple of issues with batteries. First of all, they are required. They're going to be part of the energy transition. So the first is the manufacturing of the battery. It's got a lot of critical minerals, lithium among others. The mining process to get those minerals is highly biodiversity destructive. So step one is, I think, as a country or maybe blocks of countries, we need to decide what is the right way to make a battery in order to do it in an environmentally responsible way. So we're not destroying the environment in some other country and pretending we didn't do it, right? So that's step one. Let's make them the right way. On the disposal, we deal this with nuclear all the time, right? So in nuclear, we have used fuel. We get a lot of questions around what do you do with it all? We have it all stored. I know where it is. I can take you out. We can walk around, point to it. It's stored well. So we are very good environmental stewards with nuclear fuel, and it needs to be the same for battery technologies. When a battery reaches its end of life, perhaps a secondary purpose, but then it's real end of life, we have to then say, let's fund and develop a way we're going to store and recycle those batteries. And that's where increasingly the international information that comes out on this is that battery basically have to pull them apart, recycle the materials, so you use it another time. And what you can't recycle, you have to come up with a good storage process like we do in nuclear. So again, I don't even think the storage part is really a difficult problem. It's we do it really well. Now you have to figure out who does it, right? We do it for our plants for nuclear. So if you have GM selling batteries in their car, you know, is it GM's responsibility to store the used batteries that come out of a GM car? You know, that policy part needs to be sorted out.
When does that policy part need to be sorted out? Like, well, sooner rather than later, right? Especially if you're going whole hog in this direction.
Yeah, because you already have it happening now, right? For some electric cars, their batteries are now reaching end of life. You have it in solar for solar panels reaching their end of life. What do? You can't take them and throw them in a dump or in a garbage disposal. So these are really policy decisions. And that's why I say the maturity on this conversation needs to improve in this area. So we are all being environmental stewards. I always say as good an environmental steward as the nuclear industry. If we're all there, none of these problems are problems.
All right. You ready for another question, Ken?
Sure.
You're doing great, by the way. All right, let's go to a question from Tom. Some non-government organizations are promoting removing fossil fuel-fired boilers and furnaces out of buildings in Ontario and instead installing electric heat pumps. Will we have the generation, transmission, and distribution capacity to heat all of Ontario's buildings with heat pumps?
The real short answer is no. So if we did it all tomorrow, or we don't, and that's why I said, you know, it is part of when I make the reference to the power system needing to be 2 to 3 times the size it is now. Then you get into a question of how quickly do these things happen? How quickly do we put heat pumps and electrify buildings, offices, homes? How quickly does car charging, like where everyone owns an electric vehicle or a bus that's electric? These things have to be thought out as far as what's the timeline. And then if I back up and say, like to build a new generation, like to build a nuclear plant, the one we're talking about, we've been working on it for 2 years and we think we can have it operational by 28, right? So you're sort of looking at 9, 10 years. to build a new hydroelectric station, you're sort of looking at 10, 12 years. So that's why I really think governments need to start to look and say, we have the policy, we have the goals, we have the targets, all good. Now, how do we facilitate building out the grid that, or the generation capability, the grid that needs to happen to deal exactly with what Tom asked. So, but infrastructure takes a while to do. So that's why some of these things need to start, now, this year, next year, not let's wait 8 years and then see, because then you won't be able to do it.
Well, yeah, because you can't pivot on a dime, right? It's like, I was going to say the Titanic, but I don't want to say the Titanic. But it's like a big ship, right? You have to have a plan. You need to look out years, not months. So with that, which was my question to you off the top, how important is it to be working in concert with the various institutions, right? On the policy level with government, and then also having the workers to execute your vision. And that's where your universities and colleges come in, right? Let's get to Ken, a question from Jean-Louis. Ken, are you still targeting end of 2021, end of this year, to select OPG technology for SMR, small modular reactors?
Yes. So our intention would be to make the decision on which technology to use in November, so November, early December, which would then give us the time to do a lot of the licensing requirements and other things that need to be done and get ourselves set for construction so it's operational by 28. And again, this goes to the point you were just raising and talking about. It's important to start. It's important to move on these. And I will say the one additional piece to this that's really important, and Antoinette mentioned this at the beginning, is virtually every project we do is in partnership with one of our Indigenous partners. We built, spent about $5 billion over the last number of years building hydroelectric facilities. They've all been our partners. On our nuclear station, they will be a partner in that. And then again, that's under discussion, but we always have to think that's why some of these projects, they take longer for the right reasons. And this is the right way to do business. But it's also something we have to be very aware of as we plan out the rush to electrify everything, is that let's ensure we have the infrastructure. I don't want you to be driving down the street, plug into the charger just to find out it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Make for a rough day. That's the new flat tire, right?
Yes.
That's the E flat tire. You touched on something very interesting. This is a great discussion, by the way, at least from my end. But Indigenous communities, boy, they're in the forefront. Such a tragedy, discussing the Kamloops issue from a couple of weeks ago. We're staying on top of that on CTV News Channel. To that point, though, I did an interview on the network a couple of days ago just about working with Aboriginal business communities or Aboriginal communities. What does that business model look like? How is that going for you? How integral? Give us some more color on that. How integral is it to work with these communities so that everyone prospers here?
Yeah, to me, first of all, it's the partnerships we have across our hydroelectric stations. We built a solar station down towards Hamilton. We have two First Nation partners, our owners in it. They are great partners. And, first of all, they're great. They're sophisticated. But I think as importantly, what they bring is this environmental stewardship conversation to a different level, right? Because it's their land. Well, it's their land we're building on. So, when we go to build a hydroelectric station, you're diverting water, you're changing the flow of a river, it affects fish, it affects the biodiversity around it. And what we find in our discussions as we bring them in as partners is that discussion is more rich. And therefore we make better decisions, because once you build a hydro station or a nuclear station, it's there for 50 years. Sir Adam Beck's been there for over 100. But so these are important. So I don't think we should be doing an infrastructure project in Canada without not just the consultation process, but without thinking of them as partners in the project, which is good. I think it's the right thing to do. And I think what it points to is also the economic prosperity of some of our Indigenous communities, which is great. And it is just I think as a company, we're very proud of, we haven't done everything right, but we've done a few things right in this area. And I think we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
All right. Thanks for your comments on that front. Okay, it's 12:50. Technically the end of our Q&A, but we've got a few that I think we can get through, power through real quick if you're game. You want to do that?
Sure, short answers.
Okay, yeah, let's do. Yeah, no, you've been great. You've been great. Okay, so let's do one from Lori. Ken mentioned decarbonizing the full supply chain. Is there a concern about the supply of rare metals? You touched on this a bit earlier. Lack of supply rather of rare metals and resources being used in batteries, EVs, and other green energy sources. Ken.
Yes, this is a central issue to getting to a green economy. That the metals, there's 6 or 7 core critical minerals. Ontario has a strategy for it that they're just beginning to roll out. The feds have one, but it requires a lot of action. I don't think we can go and be reliant on 3 or 4 countries in the world to get our critical minerals from. It's a recipe to not being able to get certain minerals. And there's some we just can't get in Canada. There's a lot we can. So it is a strategic imperative, I think, for the country to develop a supply chain for these minerals, rather than
one of those countries is China, right?
Yeah, I think China, the report I read, they smelt about 80% of many of them. So wow. They mine a lot. Congo's a big one. Chile is big, but some of these countries but if we need these for solar panels, for batteries, for a whole bunch of different technologies, we need to be somewhat reliant. And a good lesson from the pandemic is when you don't have the ability to produce a vaccine, you get very reliant on other people. We can't let ourselves get into that spot on critical minerals. Yeah,
we saw how that rolled out or didn't roll out, right? Being vaccine takers and not vaccine makers. Hopefully, and it doesn't have to be. That's a great point. It doesn't have to be the next pandemic. It could be anything. We got to be prepared, right? The more independent we can be as a nation, one would think that it'll make us a lot more prosperous. Ken, question from Anne. What security will there be when everything is dependent on the electricity grid? Will there be stored capacity to deal with outages?
Yes. So I think on the security, we always think about 2 things. So what happens when certain of the technologies aren't available or don't work? It's how do you build a system? This way, something like hydrogen will be important. It's just a way to store energy. You store it in hydrogen, and then you just bring it back onto the system as electricity if you need to use it. Pump storage, where you fill up reservoirs and then use them when you need them. So the storage, to me, is just another form of generation, and that's how a robust system needs to be built. Hydro-Quebec has a lot, right? Because they have ability to basically store behind a lot of their big water facilities and use it when it's required. So yeah, it is part of the other part of security. I think we get more reliant on electricity is cyber. It becomes even more important then that you can prot the entire electricity system from the stuff we're seeing happen in the US with Colonial Pipeline, these other things. So it's like I say, once we're 100% electric or close to it, you can't have the system being knocked out by cyber activities. So both of those security pieces are important.
And we know that's certainly a big topic, presumably being discussed right now between Russia and the U.S., right? The presidents of both nations in Geneva. Real quick answer, sir, if I can get to this. It dovetails from what you just talked about. Can OPG, it's from Mike, what can OPG do to lead the hydrogen economy? Final question.
We're going to do exactly what we've announced. We're doing the business cases to build 2 hydrogen facilities at 2 of our facilities. We're going to, which I think will then give others confidence to do the same. So this is not something, we're not going to produce all the hydrogen that Ontario needs or Canada needs. There's lots of other people that can do that, but we're going to lead the way in doing it, make a few mistakes in doing it, and that'll be okay. But then I think it will encourage many others across the country to go ahead and do the same thing. And but we'll have a hydrogen capability by 23 or 24 if we move as quickly as what I think our team will move.
All right. Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you, sir, doing a deep dive into all these different power sources and seeing what lies ahead for the economy and what lies ahead for the nation. I'm looking forward to chatting with you tonight. CTV News Channel, about 7:15 Eastern Standard Time. So we'll pick up the conversation. Hopefully, folks watching us now will tune in tonight as well. Ken, thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Really appreciated the conversation. I think it's one that that everybody needs to hear. So I think this is a good continuation of it.
Absolutely. All right, Ken. Antoinette, take it away. Now I'll throw back to you, Antoinette.
Thank you, Anita and Ken. And
You
I'm
bet.
sure Ken and our audience will agree that you would do a much better job at answering the questions
I don't
than
know.
I ever would have. You did. It was a magnificent conversation, a very insightful discussion around the future of energy and the role electricity will play in reaching net zero by 2050. I would now like to introduce Daniel Levitin, Vice President, Stakeholder Relations at Hydro One, to deliver some closing remarks.
Thank you, Antoinette. Well, as you heard, my name is Daniel. I'm representing Hydro One today. I know I speak for a lot of us here when I say I'm looking forward to being able to do this in person in the future. It's a really engaging conversation, and maybe we'd start there by thanking the Empire Club of Canada for hosting the event, to Anita Sharma and Ken Hartwick for the timely and really important discussion on our electric future, Ontario's in particular. I can say as the province's largest electricity transmission and distribution company, we operate 98% of Ontario's transmission grid. We power 42 local distribution companies. We directly serve 1.4 million customers, residential and business customers, 88 Indigenous communities. And we often reflect that Ontario is 40% of Canada's population. And we, along with OPG and a number of other players in the sector, really do power Canada's economy. The closing of Ontario's coal plants in particular led to the single largest reduction of GHG emissions, not only in Ontario, but across Canada. And the result is that our grid is largely emission-free, one of Canada's cleanest electricity grids. For us at Hydro One, this clean energy mix means that 96% of the electricity we deliver is clean. Powering cars, trucks, trains, buses, boats with electricity, not to mention large facilities, rather than gas or diesel, will make a huge impact. In Ontario, more than 30% of our carbon emissions come from transportation. So there's a real opportunity there. It's also why we're really proud to be partnered with OPG to create the Ivy charging network, which by the end of the year will be Ontario's largest and most connected EV networks, with 160 chargers operating in 70 locations across the province. So as you might have heard, the grid's ability to integrate and be flexible is critical for Canada to achieve that net zero target by 2050, which is why we are making necessary investments in a smarter, sustainable, and reliable electricity system to energize life for families, businesses, and communities now and in the future. Obviously, the benefits of electrification are significant. It lowers costs for customers, displaces carbon, it's good for the environment, and supports made in Ontario jobs and economic growth. In order to effectively take action against climate change, however, and support the rise of new technologies like electric vehicle manufacturing, battery storage, we have to act now. And I think Ken laid that out quite clearly. It's going to take a village, so to speak, to do that. And we can certainly say at Hydro One, working with industry partners like OPG, the right investments need to be made. We need to prioritize those investments and ensure that Ontario is very well prepared. Again, on behalf of Hydro One and everyone in attendance today, thanks, Anita, for leading a great conversation, and Ken for your discussion today and your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, and thanks everybody for attending and supporting these important discussions. And of course, please be safe.
Thank you, Daniel. And again, thank you, Anita and Ken, and everyone for joining us today. June's a busy month for the Empire Club with 3 more events in the calendar. Coming up next is an Empire Club Nights event focusing on the next Canadian federal election, titled Back to the Ballot Box. Aren't we looking forward to that? The event will take place on June 23rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Following that, on June 28th at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, we will be hearing about getting back to normal, what it means and what it will take. And then on June 29th at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time as well, we'll be discussing building better in 2021 by reflecting on our past and looking to our future. Registration for all of our virtual events is complimentary, and more details are available at empireclubofcanada.com. We hope to see you then. Thank you all again, and this meeting is now adjourned.